Kieran Doyle and Niall Keegan, two names etched in Dublin's darkest streets, bound by loyalty and shattered by betrayal. One was the feared enforcer who ruled the underworld with iron fists and ruthless precision. The other, his trusted protégé, who turned friend into enemy and set in motion a deadly fall no one saw coming. This is the story of power, greed, and vengeance that tore Ireland's most notorious gang apart and left a city haunted forever. Kieran Doyle was born in 1981 in Crumlin, a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Dublin. It was a place where the law was just a suggestion and loyalty to the streets meant survival. Kieran was the third of 5 children, raised in a 2-bedroom council house by a single mother who struggled to make ends meet. From a young age, Kieran learned that power came not from money or education, but from fear, and he learned quickly how to use it. By the time he was 13, Kieran had already been expelled from school twice and arrested once for assaulting a teacher. He didn't care. He saw education as useless in a world where the real currency was respect. And respect in Crumlin came through violence. He started off running errands for older boys, delivering small packages, tailing people, collecting debts. But it didn't take long for him to make a name of his own. He was big for his age, quick to throw a punch, and even quicker to escalate. He didn't threaten, he acted. That reputation. In the late 90s, Dublin's gang scene was beginning to shift. Heroin had ravaged the inner city during the previous decade, and now cocaine was making its way in. The demand for muscle was high, and Kieran, then in his late teens, found himself working as an enforcer for a local loan shark. It was here he caught the attention of the Byrne family, one of the most powerful criminal organizations in Dublin. They saw potential in him, not because he was strategic or clever, but because he was willing to do what others wouldn't. He never hesitated. He never flinched. The Byrnes brought him in slowly. First, small jobs, intimidation, debt collection, the occasional message sent with a baseball bat. Then, more serious tasks. As Kieran's involvement deepened, so did his notoriety. Rivals feared him, associates obeyed him, and the police couldn't touch him. No one would testify. No one would talk. Kieran didn't speak much himself, but when he walked into a room, the atmosphere changed. People moved out of his way, eyes dropped, conversations stopped. By his mid-20s, Kieran Doyle had become known across Dublin as the enforcer. He wasn't just muscle anymore, he was legend. There were whispers that he had thrown a man off a bridge for stealing from the Byrnes, that he'd buried enemies alive in construction sites. Whether the stories were true didn't matter. They served their purpose. Fear did the work for him. Kieran didn't care about being liked. He didn't care about fame or wealth. What he craved was power, the kind that made men obey without question and sleep with one eye open. And in that dark corner of Dublin, he found it. By the time Kieran Doyle was 30, he had solidified his position as the Byrne family's most trusted enforcer. He was no longer just the man who carried out the violence, he was the one who kept the entire structure from collapsing. Loyalty ran through him like blood. He didn't question orders, didn't hesitate, didn't scheme. His job was to protect the empire, and he did it without mercy. The Byrne family was more than just a criminal outfit. They were a machine. Drugs, weapons, loan sharking, protection rackets. Every corner of Dublin's underground economy bore their fingerprints, and at the center of that web stood Doyle. If someone failed to pay a debt, he made sure they never forgot it. If a rival threatened the family's territory, he silenced them, often permanently. It wasn't just about inflicting pain, it was about making examples. One brutal beating could settle 100 future problems. Within the crew, Kieran was both respected and feared. Younger gang members idolized him, but kept their distance. His loyalty was absolute, and his methods were ruthless. He followed a code, one built not on honor but on discipline and silence. Betrayal, even a whisper of it, was met with swift and final consequences. There was no second chance, no negotiation. This code earned him the respect of the Byrne leaders and the silent fear of everyone else. Kieran had no family of his own, No wife, no children, no distractions. He lived alone in a nondescript flat in the Liberties, always moving carefully, never staying in one place for long. He didn't drink heavily or use drugs. He didn't attend parties or show off. Everything he did was calculated, cold and deliberate. He knew the streets like the back of his hand. He knew which pubs were safe, which alleyways were dangerous, and which cops could be bought. But beneath the surface of order, pressure was building. Rival gangs were growing bolder, younger criminals were more reckless, and the city's underworld was starting to shift. Small-time dealers were beginning to break away from their handlers, setting up their own networks. It wasn't chaos yet, but it was coming, and Kieran could feel it. Despite the growing tension, Doyle remained calm. His job hadn't changed. He kept the Byrne operations running smoothly, ensuring that every shipment, every deal, every transaction was protected. And when cracks began to form, he was there to seal them shut with fists, threats, or worse. His loyalty remained unquestioned, his purpose unchanged. To the outside world, Kieran Doyle was the immovable pillar holding up a criminal empire, but in the shadows, forces were gathering, forces that didn't fear him the way others did. And though he couldn't see it yet, the rules were changing. The old ways were no longer enough to survive. In 2018, a new opportunity emerged that would change everything. A European cocaine syndicate based out of Antwerp was expanding into Ireland. They wanted full control of the supply chain, bypassing middlemen, and they were looking for someone local with the muscle and reach to make it happen. Word spread fast through the underworld, but most crews were cautious. The deal was risky. The syndicate was known for its brutality, and any partnership with them meant stepping onto dangerous ground. The Byrne family chose to pass. They didn't trust outsiders, especially not ones with their own agenda. But Kieran Doyle saw something different. To him, the offer wasn't a threat, it was a chance. For the first time in years, he saw a path to independence. He was tired of enforcing someone else's rules, of cleaning up other people's messes. The syndicate didn't care about loyalty or tradition. They wanted results. And Kieran believed he could give them that quietly, efficiently, and without asking for permission. So he struck a deal. In secret meetings held in quiet backrooms and abandoned warehouses, he agreed to facilitate access to the Byrne network. He knew every route, every connection, every contact the family relied on, and in exchange for opening those doors, the syndicate promised him a cut far beyond what he earned as a soldier. They promised him a seat at the table, not as a servant, but as a partner. Kieran began building a side operation. Carefully, quietly, he used the Byrne infrastructure to move the syndicate's product, layering his own people into the system. Nobody noticed at first. The volumes weren't suspicious, the faces were familiar, and the profits kept flowing. But slowly, Doyle's world started to shift. He was no longer just enforcing the Byrne family's power, he was growing his own. He recruited a few trusted men, mostly younger guys who owed him. They handled distribution and moved cash offshore through fake companies and cryptocurrency wallets. Doyle maintained distance from the day-to-day deals, protecting himself from exposure. The operation grew fast. Too fast. The money was different now. It wasn't a weekly envelope or a cut of someone else's score. It was big, constant, and clean. Doyle started investing in apartments in Spain, laundering funds through shell companies in Eastern Europe. For the first time in his life, he began thinking about the future, his future, not the Byrne's. But ambition has a cost, and the bigger Doyle's network grew, the more eyes turned toward him. Quiet whispers in the Byrne crew began to surface. Why was Kieran spending more? Why was he moving without clearance? Why were certain shipments going missing? He had built something powerful, but in doing so, he had made the deadliest mistake in his world. He had started believing he couldn't be touched. Kieran Doyle had always been cautious, methodical, and focused on control. But as the months passed, the secret operation he built with the European syndicate began to outpace the one he had spent years protecting. The profits were staggering. More money than he had ever seen flowed through his accounts, disguised in offshore holdings and fake property deals. It changed him. Slowly, subtly, he shifted from being the Byrne family's most trusted enforcer to a man with his own empire, one that answered to no one. He used the Byrne routes to ship product, their safe houses to store it, and their men to move it, all while funneling the gains into his private network. At first, it was manageable, but greed has a way of expanding beyond its limits. Doyle began offering better prices to key dealers across Dublin, undercutting Byrne-controlled suppliers. Some jumped at the chance, others hesitated, but Kieran made sure they understood that refusal wasn't an option. His reputation still carried weight, and most weren't brave enough to question him. The Byrne family didn't notice at first. On the surface, everything still looked normal. Money flowed in, shipments arrived, debts were collected, but slowly the cracks appeared. Loyal customers stopped calling, long-time partners started pulling back. Small payments missed their deadlines, Byrne lieutenants began to ask questions, and not all the answers made sense. Kieran brushed off the risks. He believed he could handle any fallout. For years he had kept the streets in check through fear and force. He thought that nothing had changed, but it had. He had changed. What began as a calculated side operation had turned into a full-blown takeover. His need for power had eclipsed his loyalty. And without realizing it, he had made himself a threat to the very people who once protected him. Internally, some of the Byrne men began suspecting that someone within the organization was diverting resources. Small-time dealers who had always paid on time were now late or missing entirely. A few even switched allegiances in secret, and while Doyle still held authority, his reach wasn't as absolute as it once had been. The first real sign of trouble came when a meeting with a major distributor collapsed without explanation. The man had been a reliable partner for years, but now he was working exclusively with Doyle's off-the-books crew. That single decision sent ripples through the organization. Suddenly, Kieran wasn't just managing two sides of the business. He was standing in the middle of them, watching them drift apart. And the farther he moved from the barns, the harder it became to hide what he was doing. He thought he was untouchable. But in the shadows of Dublin's criminal world, someone was watching. Someone who had once called him a brother. The turning point came quietly, almost unnoticeably, in the form of a missing name on a delivery manifest. A small discrepancy. A single courier who didn't show up where he was supposed to. At first it seemed like a minor slip, common in the drug trade where mistakes were routine, but this time, it wasn't an accident. The courier was Sean Talbot, a low-level runner with deep connections to both the Byrne family and Kieran Doyle. Talbot was known for his reliability. He'd worked in the background for years, moving product between safe houses, managing cash drops, and occasionally acting as a lookout. He wasn't particularly important, but he knew more than someone at his level usually would, and he had recently been seen in the company of one of Doyle's new distributors, someone who had never been cleared by the Byrne family. When Talbot vanished, there was no call, no message, no body. His car was found abandoned on the outskirts of Talbot, keys still in the ignition, driver's seat stained with blood, his phone was wiped clean, his bank account untouched. To outsiders, it might have looked like a random disappearance, but to those in the inner circle, it meant something far more dangerous. Someone was cleaning house. The Byrnes started asking questions, quietly at first. They didn't confront Doyle directly, but they began pulling in other crew members for closed-door conversations. Some were asked about Talbot, others about shipments, cash routes, new faces on the street. Kieran heard about the inquiries almost immediately. He knew what they meant. The family was suspicious. They hadn't accused him yet, but the questions were circling closer. What bothered Kieran most wasn't that the Byrnes were looking into him. It was that Talbot had disappeared without his instruction. Kieran hadn't ordered a hit. If someone had silenced Talbot, it wasn't on his command. That meant someone else was moving behind the scenes. Someone inside his growing network who had taken it upon themselves to remove a loose end. For the first time, Kieran felt a ripple of unease. He had built his empire on control. But this wasn't controlled. It was messy, rushed, and dangerous. If Talbot had been taken out because he knew too much, then others could be next, and whoever made that call had done so without considering the consequences. Still, Kieran couldn't afford to look weak. He told no one of his concerns. Instead, he doubled down, reassuring his crew, pressing his partners for loyalty, and watching the Byrne family closely. But the balance had shifted. The quiet whisper of felt a ripple of unease. He had built his empire on control. But this wasn't controlled. It was messy, rushed, and dangerous. If Talbot had been taken out because he knew too much, then others could be next, and whoever made that call had done so without considering the consequences. Still, Kieran couldn't afford to look weak. He told no one of his concerns. Instead, he doubled down, reassuring his crew, pressing his partners for loyalty, and watching the Byrne family closely. But the balance had shifted. The quiet whisper of betrayal had become a murmur, spreading through both sides of the fence. Talbot's disappearance hadn't just exposed a crack in Doyle's operation, it had opened a wound. And in the world Kieran had tried to rule, open wounds never stayed hidden for long. 2 weeks after Sean Talbot's disappearance, Kieran Doyle himself vanished without a trace. It was a move that no one expected. One moment, he was still seen on the streets of Dublin, calm and composed as always. The next, he was gone, like smoke disappearing into the air. At first his crew thought he was lying low. Maybe the pressure from the Byrne family had become too intense. Maybe he was handling things quietly, as he often did. But as hours turned into days, and days into weeks, the silence became deafening. His last known location was a hotel in Limerick, a quiet, mid-range place often used for business meetings or temporary hideouts. His black Audi was found parked in the rear lot, keys still in the ignition. Inside the vehicle, investigators discovered his burner phone, smashed and left beneath the passenger seat. His watch, an expensive one bought during his early expansion, was found on the dashboard. Most chilling of all was the bloodstain on the driver's seat, fresh enough to suggest violence, but not enough to confirm death. No security footage was recovered. The hotel's CCTV system had gone offline that night due to what was officially blamed on a power surge. There were no witnesses, no reports of a struggle, no signs of forced entry, just the blood, the phone, and a rising wave of uncertainty that swept through both the Byrne family and Doyle's splinter operation. Theories swirled. Some said the Byrne family had finally acted, taking out the man who betrayed them. Others whispered that the European syndicate had found out Doyle was cutting them out of deals, running his own show behind their back, and decided to make an example of him. A few believed he had staged the entire scene himself, disappearing to avoid the fallout he knew was coming, and fleeing abroad under a new identity. But no one could prove anything, and in the absence of proof, fear began to take hold. His crew was paralyzed. Without Doyle at the helm, they had no leadership, no direction. Some panicked and fled the country. Others tried to take control of the remaining operation, leading to infighting and bloodshed. The Byrne family, though silent publicly, began sweeping through the city behind the scenes, questioning, threatening, searching for answers. But the deeper they looked, the less they found. Kieran Doyle had vanished so completely that it was as if he had never existed at all. And yet, no one believed he was dead. Not really. His name still carried weight. His reputation, built on violence and fear, lingered in every dark alley and backroom meeting. But without a body, without closure, the mystery of his disappearance grew darker with each passing day. And somewhere in the chaos, someone knew exactly what had happened, but chose to stay silent. 3 months after Kieran Doyle's disappearance, a disturbing video surfaced on a dark web forum known for trafficking in illicit content. It was posted under an anonymous account, with no title, no description, just a timestamp and a grainy thumbnail. Within hours it had been downloaded, shared and dissected by people across Europe's criminal underworld. What they saw confirmed their worst fears. Kieran Doyle hadn't vanished, he had been taken. The footage was low quality, shaky, and shot in near darkness. A man sat slumped in a chair, hands bound behind him, blood covering his face and shirt. His head hung low, his breathing shallow. Though the face was bruised beyond easy recognition, the tattoos were unmistakable, the wolf on the left forearm, the Celtic cross on the right hand. It was Doyle. In the background, a voice, distorted electronically, spoke in slow, deliberate English. The message was short. It accused the man of betrayal, of playing both sides, of breaking rules that could not be broken. It warned that this was what happened when greed outweighed loyalty. The video ended abruptly before anything more could be seen. Within hours, the clip had reached every major player in Dublin. It confirmed what many had suspected. Doyle's fall wasn't random, and it wasn't an accident. It was punishment. Cold, calculated punishment delivered by someone with power and intent. But who exactly was behind it remained unclear. The Byrne family denied involvement. The European syndicate said nothing at all, and Kieran's own crew, shattered and scattered, had no voice to respond. Authorities got hold of the footage through an intelligence tip. Digital forensics traced the upload to a remote server routed through multiple proxies, but a tiny glitch in the metadata pointed to a location just once. A villa on the outskirts of Marbella, Spain. It was a known hideout, frequently used by traffickers and smugglers. Spanish police raided it within 48 hours of the video's discovery. Inside they found nothing but destruction. The villa had been stripped clean. Bloodstains marked the floor, shell casings were found near the entrance, and parts of the walls had been scorched with fire. There were no signs of bodies, but the amount of blood suggested someone had bled heavily. A bullet-riddled chair in the center of the room matched the one seen in the video. Whatever had happened there, it had ended violently. The raid only deepened the mystery. Was Doyle executed there, or moved elsewhere before the scene was torched? Had the video been a warning or a smokescreen? No one knew. But what became clear was that someone had gone to great lengths to make Kieran Doyle disappear, not just from Dublin, but from the world entirely. And for the first time in years the streets fell silent, not out of respect, but out of fear. Nearly a year passed without another trace of Kieran Doyle. Rumors came and went. Some said he was alive and hiding in South America. Others claimed his body had been dumped in the sea off the Spanish coast. But no proof ever surfaced. The mystery of his fate had begun to fade into legend, until a seemingly unrelated arrest in Amsterdam cracked the case wide open. Patrick Connors, a mid-level smuggler with ties to both Dublin and Rotterdam, was arrested during a weapons sting. Facing a long prison sentence, Connors made a deal with Dutch authorities. What he revealed changed everything. He had information not only on smuggling routes and illegal arms shipments, but on what really happened to Kieran Doyle. Connors described a plot that had started long before Doyle vanished. He explained that Kieran's betrayal didn't go unnoticed as long as people believed. There had been suspicions, quiet ones, that were passed to someone closer than anyone suspected. Niall Keegan. Keegan wasn't just a soldier in Doyle's splinter crew. He had been handpicked by Kieran, mentored, trained, and trusted, like a younger brother. But while Doyle saw Keegan as loyal, Keegan saw Doyle's rise as an opportunity for himself. According to Connors, Keegan had begun working as a double agent months before Doyle's disappearance. He fed information to both the Byrne family and the European syndicate, carefully balancing his position between the two powers. He convinced each side that Doyle was a problem only he could fix. Then, when the time was right, he set the trap. The meeting at the Limerick Hotel wasn't random. It was arranged by Keegan. The villa in Marbella, where the video was filmed, was one of Keegan's known safe houses. He had coordinated everything: the capture, the message, the cleanup. Whether Doyle was killed or moved afterward, Connors couldn't say for certain. What he did know was that Keegan took over almost immediately. Within days of the video's release, he was meeting with syndicate contacts, offering them stability in the wake of Doyle's removal, and the Byrnes, satisfied that the threat was gone, stepped back without retaliation. Keegan's plan had worked at least for a while. He was now in charge of what remained of Doyle's operation, with backing from both major powers, but Connors revealed that Keegan had grown paranoid. He feared loose ends. He started eliminating anyone who had even a sliver of knowledge about what had happened to Doyle. The confession from Connors gave authorities the break they needed. Intelligence agencies across Europe quietly began tracking Keegan's movements. His arrogance had made him visible, and unlike Doyle, he wasn't careful. What started as a betrayal had grown into a ticking time bomb, and now, with Doyle gone and Connors talking, it was only a matter of time before everything exploded. After Patrick Connors' confession, law enforcement across Europe intensified their efforts to bring Niall Keegan down. The man who had once been Kieran Doyle's closest confidant was now the most wanted figure in the Irish and continental criminal underworld. But Keegan wasn't about to give up his newfound power without a fight. Keegan operated like a ghost, constantly on the move, switching safe houses and using multiple fake identities. He controlled his network with an iron fist, eliminating anyone suspected of disloyalty or leaking information. The violence escalated. Bodies started turning up across Dublin and beyond, former allies, informants, and rivals, each murder sending a clear message. Keegan was untouchable. Despite the chaos, Keegan made strategic moves to consolidate power. He reached out to smaller gangs and independent dealers, offering protection and access to the syndicate's supply chain in exchange for loyalty. Many accepted, seeing him as the only force strong enough to keep the peace. His network expanded rapidly, and he seemed unstoppable. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. The very violence that secured Keegan's dominance also sowed seeds of fear and resentment within his ranks. Some began to question whether the man who replaced Doyle was as invincible as he seemed. Whispers of dissent grew louder. Old allies started considering new alliances. The underworld was restless. In the midst of this tension, law enforcement made a breakthrough. An informant within Keegan's inner circle, motivated by fear and greed, agreed to cooperate. They provided crucial details about Keegan's operations, locations, and contacts. With this intelligence, police organized a series of coordinated raids across Dublin and neighboring cities. The raids were swift and overwhelming. They seized large quantities of drugs, firearms, and cash. Several high-ranking members of Keegan's network were arrested or killed, resisting capture. Keegan himself narrowly escaped, slipping through a hidden exit minutes before officers stormed his primary safe house. Now hunted like never before, Keegan's grip on the criminal world weakened. His once loyal followers began to defect or disappear, some even turning informants themselves. The syndicate, frustrated by the attention and losses, started distancing themselves. The Byrne family, sensing an opportunity, quietly moved to reclaim lost territory. Keegan's empire, built on betrayal and violence, was unraveling. The man who betrayed Kieran Doyle was becoming the target of the same ruthless game he had mastered. As police closed in, the streets buzzed with one question: how long could Keegan survive before his own fall became inevitable? The final chapter in the deadly saga of Kieran Doyle and Niall Keegan came one cold autumn night in a quiet Dublin suburb. After months of relentless police pursuit, leaked informants, and crumbling alliances, the hunt ended not with a bang, but a tense standoff. Keegan was cornered in a rundown townhouse, surrounded by armed officers and surveillance teams. For hours, negotiators tried to coax him out, but Keegan refused to surrender. His reign of terror, built on violence and betrayal, was about to collapse. As dawn approached, tactical units prepared to breach the house. Inside, Keegan was alone, exhausted, and realizing the walls were closing in. The empire he had stolen from Doyle, the power he had fought so hard to seize, was slipping through his fingers. Behind every corner, he expected betrayal, even from shadows he once trusted. When officers finally entered, they found Keegan wounded but alive. His capture marked the end of one of Dublin's most turbulent chapters in gangland history. The arrest sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld. For many, it was proof that no one, not even the most feared enforcer or the most cunning betrayer, was truly untouchable. The trial that followed uncovered a web of lies, violence, and corruption. Witnesses, many former allies of Doyle and Keegan, testified about secret deals, brutal enforcement, and the chilling video that sealed Doyle's fate. Keegan's fall from grace was laid bare, a cautionary tale of ambition that destroyed not only others but himself. Though Doyle's body was never found, the truth about his betrayal and disappearance was no longer a mystery. His deadly fall, from untouchable enforcer to targeted victim, became a defining story in Ireland's criminal history. The Byrne family slowly regained control, but remained wary, knowing that power in the underworld was never permanent. Kieran Doyle's story lives on, not just in headlines or police files, but in the fear and respect that still linger in Dublin's darkest corners. The deadly collision of